Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to, cut through the noise and get you straight to the core insights you need. So let's set the scene. Picture this with us. It's July 31st, 2025. We're right there at the Parliament House complex in New Delhi. And a really prominent figure, Rahul Gandhi, steps up and makes this, incredibly striking statement. He declares that India, under the current government, has become a dead economy.
Yeah, a dead economy. That's a huge statement.
Exactly. And he didn't stop there either. He went on, claiming that the country's economic, defense, and foreign policies were, in his words, utterly destroyed. He even asserted the economy was crippled specifically to benefit certain businessmen, naming Gautam Adani, and predicted India would be pushed into U.S.-dictated trade deals.
Wow, those are some really heavy claims. Very bold.
They really are. And when you hear assertions that strong, well, it naturally makes you want to take a much closer look, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You have to unpack that.
So our mission for you today is pretty clear. We're going to explore these assertions, but with a really objective lens. We're focusing purely on the available data, the facts we've gathered, just to see if they actually hold up.
Right. It's not about taking sides or endorsing any view.
Not at all. We just want to give you the clearest, most objective picture possible, cutting through, the political rhetoric right down to the raw data.
So where do we start? What are we digging into first?
Good question. First, we're going to dissect that overall economic picture. Is it dead or not? Then we'll shift focus. What's actually been happening in India's defense sector? Is it being destroyed?
Okay.
And finally, we'll examine India's foreign policy, its trade relationships, especially looking at those claims about specific businessmen and those dictated trade deals.
Sounds like a plan. Let's get into it.
Right. So this idea of a dead economy, what does that even mean in practice? Stagnation, decline.
Exactly. That term, dead economy, it really conjures up images of, everything grinding to a halt, no growth, maybe even going backwards, a system that's just stopped functioning.
But the data, what did you find when you actually looked at the numbers?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. When we actually dove into the data on India's economic health, both right now and looking ahead, it painted a strikingly different picture, a whole different story, really.
How so?
What's truly fascinating is how India stands out when you look at global economic projections. Take the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They're projecting India's real GDP growth at 6.4% for 2025.
6.4%. That doesn't sound very dead.
Not at all. And the UN, they forecast a very similar 6.3%. And if you look at India's own economic survey for 2024-25, it anticipates growth somewhere between 6.3% and 6.8% in the next fiscal year, FY26.
Okay, so multiple sources pointing to strong growth.
Right. And just to give you some context, global growth is projected at a much, much slower 3.0% in 2025. So India's consistent, robust growth, largely driven by strong domestic buying and big infrastructure investments, it really positions it as a major global outlier, especially when the rest of the world economy is looking a bit sluggish.
So it's not just growth, it's comparatively very strong growth.
Precisely. It's like a dynamic surge in what's otherwise a pretty subdued global landscape.
Okay, those GDP figures are impressive, definitely. But the big question for a lot of our listeners is probably, how does this affect real people? Does it translate to improvements in their lives? What about poverty?
That's a crucial point. You have to look beyond just the headline GDP number. And our research highlighted some pretty astonishing figures there, too. According to the World Bank, between 2011 and 2023, 171 million people in India moved out of extreme poverty.
171 million, that's a huge number.
It really is. And if you go back a bit further, say between 2006 and 2016, the number was even larger. 271 million people lifted out of poverty.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, this scale of poverty reduction, it really underlines how sustained growth, when combined with, targeted welfare programs, can actually translate into significant human development. It shows economic expansion really can improve lives on a massive scale.
So tangible impact there. What about other indicators, like, say, hunger?
We looked at that too. The Global Hunger Index, while it definitely still highlights areas where India needs to improve, it did show India getting better. Its position changed from 102nd in 2019 to 105th in 2024. But importantly, the severity score improved. It went from a serious 30.3 down to 27.3.
So progress, even if challenges remain.
Exactly. These aren't just abstract numbers floating around. They reflect real, tangible, often life-changing improvements for a huge number of people.
Okay, so strong growth, significant poverty reduction. But what about the everyday experience? Things like inflation, consumer spending. Because a dead economy might imply, prices are out of control or people just aren't buying things.
Right, another critical piece of the puzzle. We specifically checked inflation and consumer spending for any signs of sort of economic paralysis. What we found was that inflation is actually well within the Reserve Bank of India's target range. It's expected around 4.3% in 2025. That's considered manageable.
Okay.
And furthermore, government policies like the tax exemptions in the 2025 union budget, they're actually projected to boost GDP by about 0.6% to 0.7%. Consumer spending is getting a clear stimulus, particularly from tax cuts aimed at the middle class.
So the government is actively trying to support demand.
Precisely. It indicates a proactive approach to managing the economy and keeping consumer demand healthy. That's really the opposite of a system that's just given up or is in decline.
Right. So looking at all this data, the growth, the poverty reduction, inflation, spending, it paints a picture that's, well, quite different from dead.
Vastly different, yes.
But let's be balanced. No economy is perfect, especially one as huge and complex as India's. There are challenges, right? Things like unemployment, inequality. How do those fit in? Could someone point to those as signs of trouble?
You're absolutely right. It's vital to keep perspective. India certainly faces ongoing challenges. Persistent unemployment in certain sectors, income inequality, these are very real issues. And they continue to be tackled through various policies.
So how do we square that with the positive data?
Well, when you connect these challenges to the bigger picture, the overall growth trajectory still suggests remarkable vitality, not stagnation. It's more like think of them as growing pains within a really dynamic, fast-moving system, rather than signs that the system itself is fundamentally broken or dead.
Okay.
The economy seems very much alive. It's pushing forward, constantly adapting. The challenges are part of that rapid development process, not evidence of its demise.
That makes sense. It's a nuanced picture, not just black and white.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a pretty comprehensive look at the economic reality versus the claim. Now, let's shift gears. Moving from the economy to national security. Rahul Gandhi also claimed there was a destruction of India's defense policy. Again, really strong words. What did our research uncover there? Was the defense apparatus being weakened?
Yeah, that destruction claim was another major one, but honestly, our findings pointed in completely the opposite direction. What we found is that the Ministry of Defense actually declared 2025 as a year of reforms.
A year of reforms, not destruction.
Exactly. There's a very clear stated goal to modernize the armed forces into a force that's technologically advanced and combat-ready for the future. This isn't about dismantling anything, it's about a strategic overhaul. Think of it like upgrading your entire computer system for much better performance, not throwing it out.
Okay, so modernization is the focus. What does that look like in practice?
There's a really strong emphasis on something called jointness. That means getting the Army, Navy, and Air Force to work together much more closely, integrating their operations. There are concrete plans for establishing unified theater commands.
Theater commands, what's the goal there?
The aim is to streamline command structures and make responses quicker and more coordinated across land, sea, and air. It's a fundamental shift designed to boost overall cohesion and operational effectiveness, making the whole system work better together.
That sounds like a pretty significant strategic change. More unified, more modern. What about India's own capability, producing its own equipment, its place in the global market?
Ah, yes. The data on defense production and exports is particularly revealing here, and it directly contradicts that destruction idea.
How so?
We found that defense production within India grew over 50% just between the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2024. That's huge growth.
50% in just a few years. Wow.
And get this. Defense exports selling Indian-made equipment abroad increased an incredible 31-fold over the last decade.
31 times.
31 times. It's quite astounding. And India now has really ambitious targets. They want to be among the top 5 global defense exporters. They're aiming for $5 billion in exports by 2025 and $7 billion by fiscal year 2030.
So far from destruction, it sounds like a major expansion and push towards self-reliance and becoming a global player.
That's exactly what the numbers suggest. A robust, rapidly growing defense industrial base.
And is it just about making more stuff? Or is there focus on quality, on innovation, keeping up with modern warfare?
Absolutely critical point. And yes, there's a significant dedicated focus on innovation, on R&D. It's channeled through something called the National Defense Technology and Innovation Framework, NDTI.
NDTF, okay.
Yeah, this initiative is specifically tasked with driving breakthrough technologies, especially in really crucial modern areas like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and space warfare.
So looking ahead, not just catching up.
Exactly. It shows a forward-looking strategy, making sure India's defense capabilities aren't just modernized for today, but are also ready to integrate the next generation of technologies for tomorrow's challenges.
Okay, so the defense picture also seems quite different from the initial claim.
Mm.
Modernization, growth, innovation seem to be the key words.
That's what the evidence strongly indicates, yes.
All right, we've tackled the economy, we've tackled defense. The third major pillar of the claims was about India's foreign policy. This was multifaceted claims that the U.S. insults India, China threatens, there's no support against Pakistan, and, maybe most critically, that trade deals are simply dictated by the U.S. This paints a picture of a weak, almost subservient foreign policy.
Mm-hmm. A reactive policy, not a proactive one.
Exactly. So what did our analysis of India's actual international relations reveal? Does India look like it's taking orders?
Well, what's truly striking here is that India's foreign policy seems much more like a very skilled tightrope walker, carefully balancing between various global powers, never quite losing its footing, always keeping everyone a little bit on their toes.
A tightrope walker.
Yeah.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah, because India consistently maintains a strong sense of what's called strategic autonomy. It makes its own decisions based on its own interests. For example, we see it deepening ties with the U.S., especially in critical areas like technology and defense. But at the same time, it's expanding energy and tech relationships with Russia. And even with China, despite the obvious tensions, there has been active progress on disengaging forces along the line of actual control, the LAC. There was even that recent meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi at the BRICS summit in Kazan.
Right, the meeting in Russia.
Exactly. This isn't the behavior of a country whose policies are being dictated from the outside. It looks very much like a deliberate, calculated strategy to engage with multiple partners to serve India's own specific interests.
So, balancing act, strategic autonomy. What about its own neighborhood and its wider role in, say, the Indo-Pacific? Is it isolated or engaged?
Oh, definitely not isolated.
Yeah.
Far from it. Our findings show India's neighborhood-first policy is really active. It's strengthening ties with countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal. And remember, India provided significant economic aid to Sri Lanka during their recent crisis.
That's right, yeah.
And beyond the immediate neighborhood, India's engagement in the Indo-Pacific is very prominent, particularly through the Quad Alliance, that's the group with the U.S., Australia, Japan, and India. Their stated aim is clearly about ensuring a stable, rules-based order in that crucial region.
So actively shaping things, not withdrawing.
Absolutely. It demonstrates active engagement and influence, not isolation or withdrawal from global or regional affairs.
Okay, but let's circle back to those specific claims. Lack of support against Pakistan, being threatened by China. How do those fit into this picture of strategic autonomy and balancing?
Well, regarding Pakistan, India clearly manages that very complex relationship through established diplomatic channels. It's a continuous, nuanced process. The idea that it simply lacks external support doesn't really capture how these complex international dynamics actually work. It's not usually about other countries lining up neatly on one side or the other.
Right, it's more complicated than that.
Much more. And with China, as I mentioned, despite the real border challenges, the ongoing discussions, including that Modi-Xi meeting, show there are continuous efforts to manage tensions, de-escalate, and find ways to stabilize the border situation. India is actively playing a very complex, multi-layered diplomatic game, like chess on multiple boards simultaneously. It's making strategic moves, not just passively reacting to threats or alleged insults.
Okay, playing its own game. Now, what about that final piece, the prediction about U.S. dictated trade deals? Is India just signing on the dotted line when Washington asks?
Absolutely not. Based on what we've seen, that prediction just doesn't line up with India's actual trade strategy. India has independently negotiated and signed significant trade agreements recently with countries like the United Arab Emirates and Australia.
Okay, so deals with non-U.S. partners.
Yes. And it's actively in the middle of negotiating comprehensive agreements with major players like the European Union and Canada. Even its decision a while back to opt out of certain trade pillars within the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the IPEF, that was a very calculated strategic move. It was based on India's assessment of its own national interests, not because it was told what to do.
So choosing not to join something was also a sign of independence.
Precisely. This isn't about following orders from Washington or anyone else. It looks very much like India forging its own path in global trade, prioritizing deals and structures that it believes benefit its own economy and strategic goals, calling its own shots, basically.
Right. Okay, so we've dissected the economy, defense, foreign policy claims.
Hmm.
But there was that one very specific accusation that the economy was essentially crippled to specifically benefit a select few businessmen, with Gautam Adani named. That's a serious claim about cronyism or favoritism.
It is, and it's an important aspect to scrutinize when you talk about who really benefits from economic policies.
So what did you find when you looked at the policies themselves?
Well, when we look at the big economic policies that are currently in play, things like the Make in India campaign, the Digital India Initiative, and these massive ongoing infrastructure development projects, their stated design, the fundamental aim, is to attract investment and create jobs broadly across the economy.
Okay, broad aims.
Yes. But it's also true that the way these initiatives are structured often means that large established corporations, including major groups like Adani's businesses, are naturally well-positioned to take advantage of these opportunities. They have the scale, the capital, the networks.
Oh, they do benefit significantly?
They certainly can, yes. The discussion then really shifts to, okay, how does that growth, how do those benefits translate equitably across the whole economic spectrum? How do you ensure these broad policies end up benefiting wider society and not just, the biggest players at the top?
The rising tide lifting all boats, but maybe some boats rise higher or faster.
That's often the debate, yes. The stated goal in the policy documents is always inclusive growth, benefiting everyone. But the significant benefit accruing to large business houses is certainly a noticeable outcome, and one that fuels this kind of debate about favoritism versus broader economic strategy.
Understood. Its complex policies with broad aims can still have concentrated benefits. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We certainly have.
So let's try to bring it all together. What does this all mean for you, our listener, as you try to make sense of these big competing narratives? When we really did this deep dive into the raw data, into the facts on the ground, that initial claim of India being a dead economy, well, it appears pretty far from the actual truth.
The data just doesn't align.
Instead, what we found is an economy that's actually growing robustly, especially compared to global trends. We found a defense sector that's undergoing significant active reforms and modernization, not destruction. And we found a foreign policy that seems to demonstrate remarkable independence and a careful strategic balancing act on the global stage.
Right. Now, that's not to say there aren't challenges. We acknowledge those: unemployment, inequality, border tensions. Those are real and ongoing issues for any dynamic, rapidly developing nation.
Absolutely. But the overall picture painted by the facts we examined is undeniably one of, well, vitality, of significant progress and forward movement, not one of destruction or stagnation.
And this whole process, I think, it really raises an important question for all of us, as informed individuals navigating this incredibly complex information landscape we live in today.
Which is?
How do we get better at distinguishing between these compelling, often very bold, very black and white political statements and the reality that's often much more nuanced, more complex, the reality that's usually presented by the actual data and the facts?
That's a key skill, isn't it?
It really is. What might we gain as individuals trying to understand the world by always making that extra effort to seek out the underlying facts, to understand the context and the drivers behind the numbers, especially when the claims being made are so strong, so provocative?
Something definitely worth thinking about long after this deep dive ends. How to look past the headlines and dig into the substance.
Exactly. Keep questioning, keep digging.